When I introduce this topic, I like to remind everyone that the environment is not something separate from us. Every breath we take, every meal we eat, and every material we use depends on the natural systems that are changing rapidly. Human activity now influences the planet on a scale that no other species has ever reached. And this makes environmental biology not just interesting but essential for the understanding our own future. This chapter helps us connect the science of human biology with the global patterns in climate, biodiversity, and resource use, and it shows us why our choices as individuals and as a society actually matter. As we begin, think of the environment as a network of cycles and organisms constantly interacting. Humans have been altering those interactions through activities like agriculture, industry, and urban development. And these actions affect the chemistry of the air, the flow of water, and the stability of ecosystems. The big question in front of us are how these changes occur and what can be done to create a more sustainable future. Understanding these patterns helps us appreciate the interconnected nature of life on Earth and the responsibilities we carry as a species with global reach. When we look at the air quality, it is surprising how a small fraction of pollutants can actually have a large effect. Air is mostly nitrogen and oxygen, with only a tiny portion made up of carbon dioxide and other trace gases. Yet those traces include thousands of humans-made chemicals. These pollutants contribute to issues like smog, acid precipitation, and the destruction of the ozone layer. They also increase the production of greenhouse gases, which we'll explore next. Think about the air as a shared resource helps us understand how air quality becomes a public health and environmental challenge. Greenhouse gases like water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide trap heat in the atmosphere and keep the planet warm enough for life. The issue is that human activities have dramatically increased the levels of these gases, especially carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels and cutting down forests. With more heat being trapped, global temperatures rises, creating a long-term shift in climate patterns. This sets the stage for many ecological challenges that ripple into the human systems as well, including agriculture, weather stability, and sea level rise. The greenhouse effect itself is a natural process, but when the greenhouse gases accumulate, the balance changes. Sunlight reaches the earth easily, but the heat that radiates back out becomes trapped, causing the atmosphere to warm more than it should. This is why global warming and climate change are tied directly to gas concentrations in the air. Understanding this mechanism is important because it explains why actions like reducing fossil fuels use and protecting forests can directly influence the climate. When we talk about the atmospheric threats, the ozone layer is one of the clearest examples of how human chemicals affect global systems. Near the ground, ozone can irritate our respiratory system, but high in the stratospheres, it protects us from ultraviolet radiation. Chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, once used in refrigerants and aerosols sprays, breaks apart ozone molecules and thin that protective shield. This led to real concerns about increased UV exposure and long-term risks like skin cancer. The encouraging part of this story is that the global agreement successfully phased out most CFC use and the ozone layer has gradually recovered. Acid precipitation forms when sulfur dioxide from burning coal and oil combines with nitrogen oxide from car exhausts and mixes with water vapor in the atmosphere. The result is sulfuric acid and nitric acid that falls back to Earth in rain or snow. This damages metal structures, corrodes stone, or disrupts forests and aquatic ecosystems by altering pH levels. Regions in the northeast United States and parts of Canada have historically been hit the hardest. Because of air quality regulations, acid precipitation has decreased in many areas here, although it is still increasing in other countries undergoing rapid industrialization. Smog is a mixture of smoke, fog, and chemical pollutants that hangs over large cities, especially those with heavy traffic or industrial activity. It contains nitrogen oxide, hydrocarbons, and tiny particles that irritate the eyes and the lungs. Under normal condition, warm air rises and disperses these pollutants, but during a thermal inversion, a layer of warm air traps the smog near the ground, making air quality much worse. Modern pollution controls, cleaner fuel technologies, and catalytic converters have helped reduce smog in many places, but it still remains a major concern for human health in rapidly growing urban regions. As we shift from air to water, remember that the freshwater makes up less than 1% of all water on Earth, and so anything that threatens it has direct consequences for human survival. Three major issues stand out. First, humans use enormous quantities of water for agriculture, industry, and daily life, which strains available supplies. Second, urban development replaces natural land and pavement, preventing water from soaking into the ground and increasing runoff and erosion. Third, human activities pollute rivers, lakes, and groundwater, reducing water quality. These combined pressures show why water scarcity is becoming one of the most urgent environmental challenges in our century. Even though water covers most of the planet, almost all of it is salt water, and most fresh water is locked in ice. The tiny fraction that remains must support billions of people, and access to that water is far from equal. Industrialized countries use many times more water per person than developed countries, while some deserts and semi-arid regions are already at or beyond their carrying capacity. Diverting water from rivers or aquifers can help one community but harms another, including wildlife that depend on those natural flows. This distribution problem reminds us that water issues are not only scientific but also social and political, reshaping everything from agriculture to public health. As cities grow, natural landscapes are replaced with roads, buildings, and parking lots, and this sudden change how water moves across the land. Instead of soaking into the soil, rainwater rushes over pavement, creating far more runoff than a forest or field ever would. This extra runoff overwhelms drainage systems, and when storms water combines with sewage, it creates what is called a combined sewage overflow. These overflows carry pathogens that can spread illness like gastroenteritis and skin or respiratory infections, and the fast-moving waters erode streams and damages habitats. Urbanization may seem like a local issue, but it affects ripples beyond city borders, affecting waterways and communities downstream. Freshwater ecosystems face constant pressures from pollutants that combine from homes, farms, and industries. Organic waste from sewage, livestock operations, and food processing plants increases nutrient levels in lakes and rivers. Inorganic pollutants like nitrates from fertilizers and sulfates from detergents adds to the load. When nutrient levels rises too quickly, algae grow explosively in a process called eutrophication. As these algae die and decompose, oxygen levels drop and fish and other aquatic life struggles to survive. Some pollutants are especially dangerous because they do not break down easily and instead accumulate in the environment and inside living organisms. Chemicals like PCBs, pesticides, heavy metals, gasoline, and oil products move into waterways and soils where small organisms absorb them. As these contaminated organisms are eaten by larger ones, the concentration of toxics increases in each step of the food chain in a process called biological magnification. This is why predators at the top, including humans, carry the highest level of pollutants, even when exposure seems indirect. Mercury in fish is a classic example. By the time it reaches us, the concentration reflects the entire history of the food web. Groundwater pollution is especially concerning because groundwater moves very slowly, meaning contaminants can linger for decades. Pollutants like pesticides, fertilizers, organic solvents, and even radioactive waste can seep into aquifers from farms, industrial sites, and landfills. Since many rural communities rely directly on well water, exposure can occur without people realizing it. Studies suggest that nearly half of the groundwater systems show some form of contamination. Over time, this has been linked to miscarriages, birth defects, skin conditions, and nervous system disorders. Once pollution enters groundwater, cleaning it up is extremely difficult, which emphasizes how important prevention and careful land management truly is. When we look at the oceans, the scale of human impact becomes very clear. Several million tons of oil enters the ocean every year, and while some come from natural seepage, a large portion flows in from land runoff and spills at sea. Once oil reaches the water, some evaporates and some is broken down by bacteria, but a significant amount settles into the sediments, where it can harm marine life for years. On top of this, slow degrading waste, especially plastics, accumulates along coastlines and in massive floating patches like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Items like styrofoam can take decades to break down, and plastic bottles can take centuries. These pollutions interfere with wildlife, damages habitats, and disrupts entire food webs, reminding us that the ocean pollution is not just a coastal issue, but a global environmental challenge. When we continue examining ocean impacts, we see how both oil and slow degrading garbage creates long-lasting damage along coastlines. Oil can reach the ocean from natural seepage, runoff, or spills at sea, and although bacteria break down some of it, some of it evaporates, a significant amount ends up embedded in the sediment, where it harms shore ecosystems for years. Garbage, particularly plastics, is another major threat because it breaks down incredibly slow. Styrofoam may take around 50 years to degrade, while a single plastic water bottle can persist for 400 years. As this debris floats and washes ashore, it disrupts habitats, injures wildlife, and forms massive accumulations in the open water. When we shift our attention from oceans to land, the scale of human impacts becomes just as striking. Roughly 1/3 of the Earth's land surface has been altered by human activity, and about half of the world's forests have been removed. As people migrate into the cities, the footprint of urban areas expands, paving over soils and reducing natural areas that once absorbed rainfall, filtered water, and supported wildlife. At the same point, more than half of the global population lives in rural poverty and depends directly on the land for survival, which leads to overgrazing, logging, and intensive farming. In many regions, this results in desertification, which once produces soil becomes dry, nutrient poor, and eventually unusable for agriculture. Every 1 year, about 1.5 million acres of land is lost this way. Even our growing piles of garbage add to that pressure. When we look at energy choices, we see how tightly human life is connected to the environment. Most of the world still relies on fossil fuels, which are effective but creates pollution and adds greenhouse gases. Renewable sources like solar, wind, and geothermal, as well as hydroelectric power, offers cleaner alternatives, but each requires planning and the right conditions. Nuclear energy produces a lot of electricity but brings up safety and waste disposal concerns. Even biofuels raise questions because the land used for fuel cannot also grow food. This reminds us that every energy source has trade-offs, and choosing wisely is essential for long-term sustainability. Biodiversity represents a full variety of life on Earth, and it is shrinking because of human activity. Scientists have identified 1.75 million species, but there may be billions more that we have not seen and that depend on without even realizing it. Pollution, climate change, and habitat destruction all reduces biodiversity, weakening ecosystems and making them less resilient. This matters because healthy ecosystems provide oxygen, clean water, food, medicines, and countless services that support human life. Losing species is not just a wildlife issue. It affects our health and long-term survival. This sets us up on why conservation is becoming such a critical global priority. Human activities reshape habitats faster than most species can adapt. Pollution, farming, logging, and overfishing all chip away at the natural environment. Clearing forests for agriculture destroys the homes of countless organisms, and overexploiting natural resources reduces populations to levels that we cannot recover. Habitat loss remains one of the strongest drivers of species decline worldwide. When we alter those ecosystems, we also disrupt the natural systems that support us, from soil fertility to water cycles. As more people move into cities, the environmental footprint of those cities grows. Even though cities make up less than 3% of Earth's surface, they produce the majority of carbon emissions and use enormous amounts of water and wood. Urban areas have far less plant and animal diversity, and the heavy resource demand stretches far beyond the city limits. This means that the impact of a single city spread outwards into forests, rivers, farms, and even the ocean. Urbanization is not only a social shift, but also a major ecological force, and understanding that scale helps us make more informed decisions about the environment and about development. Biodiversity directly supports human life in ways that are easy to overlook. Plants help balance the atmosphere by absorbing carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen. Other species provide us with clothing, shelter, materials, food, and many medicines that come from natural compounds. When biodiversity declines, we lose potential resources as well as the natural system that keeps our environment stable. Here we highlight the idea that protecting other species is really another way of protecting ourselves, since human health and ecosystem health depends on the same living networks. Sustainable development focuses on meeting the needs of the present without harming the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This idea ties together everything we have been discussing because long-term environmental health depends on choices that balance economic growth, human well-being, and ecological stability. It means thinking about how we use energy, water, land, and natural resources in ways that does not exhaust them. Here we introduce the mindset that guides modern environmental planning and encourages us to think beyond the short-term solutions. Traditional measures like GDP only track the economic value of goods and services, but they do not account for environmental or social costs. That is where the GPI, or Genuine Progress Indicator, comes in. GPI adds in factors like pollution, resource depletion, and social well-being to give a more realistic picture of how a society is doing. A country can have a high GDP while its environment is declining or its quality of life is suffering. Here, this helps us understand why measuring progress requires more than just financial numbers and why sustainability must include human and environmental health. Supporting sustainability means making choices that reduce our impact while improving long-term stability. Strategies include consuming less, recycling more, and supporting sustainable agriculture. Conserving energy at home, choosing environmentally friendly products, and protecting ecosystems all contributes to healthier communities. Lowering fertility rates and reducing rural poverty also play important roles since pollution pressures and population pressures and the limited resources often drive environmental damage. Here, this ties the entire chapter together by showing that sustainability is not one action but a connection of everyday decisions that move us towards a more sustainable and stable and equitable future.